The McDonnell XF-85 Goblin has been called the most bizarre aircraft ever built. In an era of spirited aircraft exploration, the U.S. Army Air Forces approved the creation of a Parasite jet fighter designed to eject out of a Convair B-36 Peacemaker to combat interceptor attackers and protect its mothership. The fighter would then return and dock back into the bomber. The outlandish concept was conceived as far back as the 1930s, but the project resurfaced at the end of World War II. A new crop of bombers was being developed, and their escort fighters were becoming obsolete. McDonnell Aircraft then introduced us to the Goblin, a 5,600-pound egg-shaped aircraft that became the smallest jet-propelled fighter ever assembled. 2 prototypes were built, and a decorated pilot was chosen to perform the tests, the promise to revolutionize air combat held by a thread. Parasite fighters. During the Allied air offensive against Nazi Germany in World War II, American bombers such as the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24 Liberator, and the B-29 Super Fortress faced fierce opposition from Luftwaffe interceptor aircraft. To counter the threat, the United States Army Air Forces developed long-range escort fighters such as the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-51 Mustang to protect the bombers during ambushes. After the war ended, aircraft technology evolved, and a new generation of bombers with 5 times more range was developed. The Boeing B-50 Super Fortress and the Convair B-36 Peacemaker were among these state-of-the-art strategic bombers. But with more powerful bombers came new difficulties. The U.S. Army Air Forces needed a new defense strategy, since their escort fighters were now rendered obsolete and incapable of matching the new bombers. Aerial refueling was still a risky concept, pilot fatigue was a genuine concern, and the exceedingly high cost of designing new escort fighters from scratch was out of the question. Engineers would have to consider other innovative solutions. During the summer of 1944, the U.S. Army Air Forces began developing the idea of Parasite aircraft. This small escort fighter would be carried aloft and air-launched by a larger aircraft called a mothership. The parent craft would later recover the small fighter during flight using a recovery tool. Although this tiny aircraft concept perplexed some experts, Parasite fighters weren't a new idea and already had a long and complex history. Parasite aircraft dates back as far as the 1930s, when the American Navy tested the deployment of F-9C Sparrowhawk biplanes aboard 250-yard-long helium-filled airships. The Sparrowhawks used internal hooks to drop from the carrier ships, but their story was cut short when the prototype malfunctioned and crashed into the ground in 1935. During World War II, the Soviet Union also experimented with Parasite aircraft when they mounted I-16 fighters onto the bomb bays of TB-3 bombers for airstrike operations. At the same time, Japan was dropping rocket-powered Cherry Blossom kamikazes from their Mitsubishi G4M bombers. The prototypes. In early 1945, the U.S. Army Air Forces issued a request for proposal for an ultra-lightweight Parasite fighter aircraft that could fit inside the bomb bay of one of their new generation bombers. Only one company applied. McDonnell Aircraft was a young aircraft manufacturing company based in St. Louis, Missouri. They were eager to give the Parasite aircraft a try and submitted a proposal by March. In the initial concept, the fighter would be half exposed under the bomber. The USAAF rejected the proposal because they wanted the Parasite to fit entirely inside a B-36 bomb bay. The company's design team, led by Herman D. Barkey, then submitted a revised approach. After several revisions that included wooden mock-ups, the USAAF agreed to move forward with 2 XF-85 prototypes. Although plans initially called for mass production of the aircraft, the USAAF opted to wait for the prototype's test results. The Goblin. The XF-85 Goblin received its name from McDonnell Aircraft's founder, James McDonnell. The CEO fancied naming the company's jet fighters after supernatural creatures, including the F-4 Phantom II and the F-2H Banshee. The Goblin was the smallest jet-propelled fighter ever built. It was only 15 feet long, had a 21-foot wingspan, and weighed 5,600 pounds. It also had a round fuselage and swept-back folding wings to fit in the confines of a bomb bay. Despite its compact size, the Goblin was fitted with 4 12.7mm machine guns in the nose. The pilot was provided with an ejection seat, bailout oxygen bottle, and even a high-speed ribbon parachute. Finally, a recovery hook that retracted in midair was installed in the aircraft's center of gravity. Powered by a Westinghouse J-34 turbojet, the Goblin could be air-launched at altitudes of up to 48,200 feet. Its fuel supply was only 112 gallons and could endure just 1 hour in combat, but this wasn't a concern. The aircraft's performance could be maximized because, unlike other fighters, it would not have to use any fuel to reach its altitude. For its ultimate intended mission, the B-36 Peacemaker would enter enemy territory and launch the Goblin through a trapeze-shaped contraption inside its bomb bay upon encountering foreign interceptors. After chasing the enemy away, the swarm of goblins would retrieve back into their motherships with the help of hooks installed in the aircraft's nose. Production plans anticipated a mixed Peacemaker fleet with both flight carriers and bombers. Test flights. During a wind tunnel test, the first Goblin prototype, serial number 46524, was accidentally dropped 40 feet from a crane. The fall damaged its fuselage and air intake, rendering the aircraft almost useless and having to undergo thorough repair work. Thus, the second prototype would be used for the remainder of the tunnel and flight tests. Because the B-36 Peacemaker was still under production, all Goblin flight tests were carried out using a converted B-29 Superfortress mothership with a modified bomb bay and a trapeze. Because the B-29 was smaller than the Peacemaker, the XF-85 tests would fly half exposed instead of completely inside the bomb bay. The trial tests began in the summer of 1948 at South Base, Muroc Field. Some tests were performed with the Goblin attached to the B-29 while carried in a stowed position. Other tests had the Goblin tethered and extended into the B-29's airstream with the engine off so that the pilot could feel the aircraft while in flight. Pilot Edwin Schock was selected by McDonnell to test the Goblin project. A Pennsylvania native, Schock was an experienced helldiver pilot who had earned the Navy Cross for bombing a Japanese battleship during World War II. On August 23rd, Schock was maneuvering the XF-85 when he attempted a free flight after detaching from the mothership at a height of 20,000 feet. The pilot flew the aircraft for 10 minutes, proving that the Goblin could reach speeds between 180 and 250 miles per hour. However, when he attempted a hookup, he realized that the small aircraft was highly susceptible to the B-29's turbulence and the air cushion generated by the two aircraft operating so close to each other. After 3 failed attempts to hook back onto the trapeze, Schock miscalculated his approach and struck the Goblin so violently that its canopy was smashed, ripping his helmet and oxygen mask off. The Goblin began to tumble downwards, but Schock managed to stabilize it and make a belly landing on a dry lake bed nearby. Mounting repairs. After the unfortunate emergency landing, flight testing on the Goblin was suspended for over a month to repair it. Pilot Edwin Schock used the down period to practice the docking maneuver. To overcome the air cushioning effect, engineers adjusted its throttle and boosted its trim power by 50%. On October 14, 1948, Schock was finally able to successfully release the Goblin and hook back up onto the B-29. But only a week later, Schock had difficulties hooking the Goblin to the bomber's trapeze. He failed 4 more times before hitting the trapeze bar and breaking the hook on the Goblin's nose. Once again, he was forced to crash land at Muroc Field. When the damaged first prototype was finally ready, it rejoined the flight test program and completed several captive flights. According to Schock, the Goblin was stable and easy to fly. It also recovered nicely from spins, and initial data registering a 648 miles per hour top speed proved optimistic. But the test flights continued to reveal that the turbulence experienced during its approach to the Superfortress was a major problem. Upper and lower fins were added to the Goblin's fuselage to compensate for the increased directional instability in the docking maneuver. The hook was another severe complication. Although initial flights had the hook in a fixed position, subsequent flights had it bestowed and raised at will. This action caused an irregular oscillation that added to the already tricky docking maneuver. Small aerodynamic fairings were added to the hook to fix the problem and reduce the buffeting when it extended and retracted. When test flights resumed in the spring of 1949, Schock continued to have difficulties hooking back up to the Superfortress and once again damaged the aircraft before resorting to another emergency belly landing. On April 8th, he completed a successful 30-minute free flight test, but still couldn't dock. Change of plans. The 2 Goblin prototypes flew a total of 7 times, with only 3 of the flights resulting in a successful hookup. Ultimately, the Goblin revealed a lackluster performance compared to modern jet fighters, and the pilot's skills required to dock were highly demanding. Technology also caught up, and practical aerial refueling for fighters used as bomber escorts was now in development. Furthermore, Soviet jets were already eclipsing the XF-85, and the US was currently working on new long-range escort fighters relying on wingtip fuel pods. The newly established US Air Force became uninterested in pursuing the Parasite aircraft any longer, and the XF-85 project was officially cancelled on October 24, 1949. Despite the cancellation, the US Air Force continued to study the concept of Parasite aircraft through a series of projects, such as Project MX-106, Project Phycon, and Project TomTom. Some McDonnell XF-85 Goblins can be seen at the US Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, and the Strategic Air Command and Aerospace Museum in Ashland, Nebraska. Edward Schock was the only pilot who ever flew the egg-shaped Goblin.